Hi, everyone. Today is all about capacity. So, when we think about capacity management, what exactly are we talking about? Capacity is the maximum output or rate of output of your process or system. Now, a lot of people think about capacity in terms of physical spaces. So, the capacity of a restaurant might be the number of tables and chairs, the capacity of an airplane, the number of seats on a plane. But capacity can also be the rate of a process. So, for example, how much an employee can work or how much a machine could output if it was running at maximum. So, capacity is that maximum rate of output, either in your physical spaces or in your process. So, when we think about managing capacity, we have both long term and short term decisions to make. Anything from hiring and firing to staffing decisions on Friday night to making major investments like building new buildings or downsizing existing locations. So, we have long term planning with those major investment decisions. But we also have short term planning, which goes into theory of constraints, bottleneck management, and we'll talk about those in a different video. But today we're going to talk a little bit more about those major investment decisions, those longer term decisions on capacity. And many times you may have heard before, we like to capture economies of scale where possible. And the grand idea of economies of scale is as we get bigger, we're able to spread out more of our fixed cost, and that brings the unit cost down, makes it cheaper. So, economies of scale benefit both companies and consumers because you get cheaper unit cost for everyone. However, diseconomies of scale is when you get too big. When you get too big, you get too complicated, you have to add layers of management and bureaucracy, and the complexity leads to costs going up. So we want the benefits of economies of scale, but we don't want to be too big that we have diseconomies of scale. Let me illustrate this a little bit more. So in this example, we've got a 250 bed hospital. Like if we were to build a 250 bed hospital, you've got an average per person or per patient cost. But if instead we build a 500 bed hospital, of course, assuming demand is there, we would be able to spread out the fixed cost of that hospital to more patients, more beds, and that would bring the unit cost per person down. Now, why is that true? Well, when you go from building a 250 bed hospital to a 500 bed hospital, you do increase your cost of building it, of course, because it's a bigger facility, but it's not double. So when you spread out those costs, you spread out those fixed costs, you don't have to spread out double the cost. You just have to spread out more cost. And that brings the per person cost actually lower, which is what we see here in this economies of scale. Costs per person are going down. That's a good thing. Diseconomies of scale is when we go the other way. So let's say we instead build a 750 bed hospital, and because it has now reached this bigger type of hospital, we're adding more departments, we're adding more layers of management, we're adding more technologies, we're adding more physician specialties, and the costs are now going up per person. So this would be considered diseconomies of scale. You can also imagine diseconomies of scale. A good example of it is government. Government is very inefficient, and it's because it's so big. So instead of reducing the cost per person or per unit of work that's being done, that cost actually goes much higher because of the bureaucracy involved. So when we're making capacity decisions, we're trying to think through kind of who we are as a company, what is our core strategy, and then we need to think about our forecast, of course. And do I need new facilities or downsize facilities? Do I need to hire or fire? Do I need to invest in automation, software, or equipment? Can I modify my existing space for more capacity? Meaning, could I get some incremental capacity without having to build a brand new facility? Or could I eliminate some bottlenecks and gain some marginal capacity in that way? That's more of a process perspective that we'll talk about when we go over theory of constraints and bottleneck management. So there's two major kind of strategies when it comes to growing capacity. It would also work with downsizing, but most people talk about it in terms of kind of expansion. So the first one is called an expansionist strategy. This is a more aggressive strategy because what you're saying is I'm going to build capacity before the demand is there. So I'm building capacity in advance of demand. That means when capacity initially opens, like your new building, your new facility initially opens, there's a period of time where you don't use the full capacity. So it is underused capacity until demand catches up, and then you're fully utilizing that capacity. So in an expansionist strategy, you're building the capacity before the demand. There are pros and cons, of course. So the benefit of this is if your demand really is increasing, you're ready for it. So you're building capacity, you're ready for the increase in demand, and you're able to meet that demand. So you're able to capture that customer and that value. The downside, of course, is if your forecast is wrong, you've spent a bunch of money and now the demand never gets there. So you have unused capacity and you've overspent. And depending on your financial situation, this can be a quick way to going out of business. So an expansionist strategy is considered aggressive because of those reasons. It can be both good, but also risky in that investment. The other type of strategy is called a wait and see strategy, and you can kind of tell by the definition, it's a or by the title, it's a more conservative strategy. And the idea is I'm going to add incremental capacity as demand is here and as it's needed. So there are periods of time when I don't have enough capacity, meaning I'm not able to fully meet demand. It means that when I'm adding capacity, I'm adding it incrementally. So that means maybe I'm adding on to existing facilities, adding more machines, adding more employees, instead of doing that expansionist version of whole new facilities. I'm adding on to existing facilities here. In a wait and see strategy, the pro would be if your demand drops off, you don't have any major investments that you now have a financial burden of. So that's the good thing. The downside, of course, is if your demand is high or grows at a much greater trajectory than you actually expected, you're not able to meet it. And then you have customer service problems, or you have customers that actually leave you for a competitor because you weren't able to meet demand. So, there, of course, are pros and cons to a conservative wait and see strategy as well. Now we can actually calculate how much our capacity we are using, and we can calculate that through utilization. So utilization is the degree which your equipment or your facility or your employees are being utilized. So the calculation here is your what I would call actual work done. So your average output rate, this would be the actual work completed by employees. You could also think about it as actual customers served or actual products made. So it's your work that's actually done divided by your maximum capacity. And we usually refer to it as a percentage. So we would multiply by 100 to make it a percent. So this would tell you, your equipment is 80% utilized, or your airline flight was 95% booked. So you could calculate this. The other kind of useful thing you can do with this equation is calculate your maximum capacity. So if you have a target utilization and you know your actual demand or actual work, you could calculate how much capacity you need in place. So this can be a useful equation in that respect as well. Now, the other metric we look at is called a capacity cushion. And a capacity cushion goes hand in hand with utilization. They add up to 100%. So utilization plus capacity cushion equals 100%. And what this means conceptually is sometimes we might want a buffer capacity. We want extra capacity on average to be available because we want high levels of customer service, or there might be other reasons why we want strategic capacity cushions. So let me give you two examples. For airlines, when it comes to number of bookings on a plane, they don't want any capacity cushion. They want the flight to be fully booked. So they want utilization to be as close to 100% as possible and capacity cushion to be as close to zero as possible. So that's an airline, a flight. But if you consider a context like an emergency room, you probably want some strategic capacity cushion in your emergency room. So you wouldn't staff for 100% utilization. You would try to staff with some strategic cushion because you never know how the night's going to go. So we can, depending on our industry, plan for specific levels of capacity cushion. So these are our two relationships here that we'll look at to wrap up our capacity decisions. This is cushion, capacity cushion is 100% minus utilization, or you can also think about it as utilization plus cushion equals 100%. And you can manage this strategically. So let's say I'm running a restaurant and I want to make sure I have enough time to give proper customer service to my customers. So maybe I want to run a 20% strategic capacity cushion. So in that scenario, if I want a capacity cushion of 20%, that means my utilization needs to be around 80%. And if I know my utilization based on this relationship, I can plug it into my utilization equation, 80%, plug in my actual demand from customers at my restaurant, and that will tell me what my maximum capacity needs to be, both in staffing and maybe physical spaces as well. So I hope this helped you understand some of the capacity decisions we have to make. Take care.